This is Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Ken Johnston. And Ken, welcome. It's really great to have you on the show, and I hope that this will be a little bit different of an interview than the one you are used to, because I've actually heard several of your interviews, and they're all great. But I'm hoping to cover a little bit different ground if we can manage it. At the same time, I want to hear your usual story, which is fascinating anyway. So kind of with that introduction, at the moment, I'm going to just give people the overview of your sort of CV as it is that you sent me, and then we can get right into it, okay?
I'm glad to be here, and I'm standing by.
Okay, great. So Dr. R. Ken Johnston Sr. is one of 4 civilian astronaut consultant pilots from the Apollo Moon program and is a retired aerospace engineer, U.S. Marine, and NASA whistleblower. He refused to strictly follow orders and destroy a nearly complete collection of 8x10 glossy photo prints from the Apollo program. Photos that are not available from NASA at this time and are of higher resolution than what is found online. Johnston was born at Fort Sam Houston U.S. Army Air Base in San Antonio, Texas in 1942, and studied at Oklahoma City University. He enlisted in the U.S. Marines in August of 1962 and reported to Pensacola as a Marine officer cadet for flight training in September of 1964. He left active duty from the Marines in August of 1966. He was hired by Grumman Aircraft Corp because of his training as a pilot with an avionics background to become a principal contractor for the Apollo lunar module testing, because his duty was to assist with cockpit and instrument development and astronaut training at the Manned Space Center, and it was eventually renamed JSC in Houston, Texas, as a civilian astronaut consultant pilot. He worked as a contractor from 1966 to 72 during the Apollo program. He was employed by Brown and Root, Northrop, principal contractors to NASA for management of the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, where all moon rocks were stored, curated, cataloged, and in some cases distributed to scientists who had successfully applied to carry out analysis in their own labs. And an important part of Johnston's duties was to provide photographic and preliminary analysis of lunar samples to contributing scientists from around the world. I'm going to stop there because it goes on for quite a while, and let you sort of pick up the ball here and augment that introduction with some words of your own about kind of to focus the mind and also to cover maybe why it is that NASA is now trying to hide the records of your service.
Well, let's go back to finishing up the Apollo program. When after we landed on the moon, actually Grumman, that built the lunar module, laid off almost 30,000 employees across the whole United States. And I was fortunate enough, Grumman was very nice to most all of us. We got 2 weeks severance pay, plus we got 2 weeks of searching to find another job while we were being paid. And I was able to go to work over at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, and I caught Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins in quarantine. There, those days, the first 2 missions, we quarantined the astronauts for 2 weeks to be sure that they weren't bringing back any pathogens and anything else from the moon that might contaminate the Earth. In that capacity, I became the director of the Data and Photo Control Department at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, which gave me direct contact. Plus, the fact you had to have a secret clearance and a top secret clearance to get into the photo lab, into the back inner sanctums where all of the originals and things were kept. Because we had contributing scientists from all over the world that were going to be working with the lunar samples, they wanted to have pictures from orbit to showing the terrain where we landed, so they could get a rough idea of what they thought the geology would be. They wanted to have pictures from the lunar surface showing the orientation of the rock, so they could determine the effects of solar radiation that might have been on there. So I maintained a set of 5 copies of every sequence, and it also had access to the 16 millimeter sequence cameras that were in the flight deck of the lunar module. All of them that were taken with the Hasselblad cameras. On Apollo 11 was only Neil Armstrong. He's the only one that had a camera. So people think that the astronaut coming down the ladder, that was Buzz. That was Buzz Aldrin coming down. And that first footprint that you see on the lunar surface, that's actually Buzz Aldrin. But it's just the way things worked out that Neil had the camera. And after that, on Apollo 12, both the lunar module pilot each had a camera, a big Hasselblad strapped to the front of their spacesuits. So after we finished up with all of the Apollo flights, I shifted over. I was going to be working on what we call the Apollo telescope mount, and that would have been using one of the other 3 lunar modules, because we were contracted to build the 20 up through Apollo 20, but we only flew up through Apollo 17. Spacecrafts 18, 19, and 20 never flew. We were going to use the ascent stage of one of those 3 remaining lunar modules and put a large telescope on the bottom of it, like Hubble turned out to be, fly it up to our first space station called Skylab, and then we could just back away from the Skylab and rotate around and take pictures of anything in the universe we wanted to. That got canceled, and as such, I got laid off from that one too. I went into business for myself for a couple of years, and then NASA was looking for some more astronauts to work on Skylab and the shuttle program. So I had letters of recommendation from Neil Armstrong and Jack Schweikert, Jim Irwin, and just about anyone I wanted there, recommending me to become one of the regular astronauts instead of a civilian astronaut consultant pilot. And so I went back to work at the Johnston Space Center and applied, was doing good. And I got called into astronaut Vance Brand's office and to hear the results, because there's the next week who the next group of 26 astronauts would be. Vance said, "Sit down, Ken." He said, "I don't know how to tell you this." He says, "But the government's gotten involved in the selection of astronauts, and they don't want to have jet jocks. They want to have PhD scientists. And at the time, I only had 3 bachelor's degrees." And he says, "So your name has been struck from most discipline." I'd gone through the training with the guys. I'd helped train them to fly the lunar module. And here, with their recommendations, I'm being cut because of the way the government wanted to play the game. A few years later, about 10 years actually, I had my first doctorate degree, and that was in metaphysics. And I applied for it again and got down to the year. I was called in. They said I was too old. So, even though I have ancestors that have lived over 100 years, I think they made a mistake. But now there's good reasons perhaps why I wasn't in on the inside anymore. And as the director of the Data and Photo Control Department, when I would use those 5 sets to give out pictures of the lunar samples to the contributing scientists, I would also myself. And at one point, down near, I believe it was Apollo 15, after Apollo 15, I got a directive that said for me to destroy all but one set. And I complained to my lead with BRN, and I said, "We paid for these with our tax money, and there are universities that would love to have their own copies of this for their science departments." And he says, "No, you're told just to get rid of them. You can keep 1 set, but get rid of them." And I complained a little more. He said, "I don't care what you do, just dump them in the dumpster." So I took that as sort of a tacit approval to keep my set. And I took another completed set, which I later donated to Oklahoma City University's science department. But the other 3 I dumped in the Dempsey dumpster. And as fate would have it, I've come across an individual says that they found a lot of the pictures in the dumpster. So we're kind of bouncing off of each other, how these pictures have wound up. I mean, the advantage that people that look for anomalies or really want to see what was seen on the surface, by having the pictures that I have, which were made off of the original first generation, the difference is so great about what you're looking at compared to what you get now if you order a picture. If people have, I'm sure most of the people have used copy machines, and if you make a copy of a copy and then a copy, pretty soon you don't have any of the details. But in the archive and the collection that I have, a lot of details there.
Okay. Now, in your situation, I've got, actually, I'm going to put this on the screen here, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this letter here. This is, I guess, some kind of a letter basically verifying that you did work for NASA, and I'm going to put that on there so people could see that this was sent to me by one of your assistants, I guess, and are you able to see that letter there?
I see it very clearly. In fact, that letter was written by Dr. Jeffrey Warner, who actually got his first doctorate degree in geology from MIT when he was only 14 years old. And Dr. Jeffrey Warner originally started the Data and Photo Control Department at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. But in order for him to run the processing lines, processing the lunar samples and getting them cut into thin sections and things that scientists wanted, he couldn't keep up with things. He needed help. So they asked me if I would be willing to take over for him, and I was more than happy to do so. This letter of commendation from Dr. Warner is terrific. And I'm awfully glad that I became a bit of a pack rat and kept all of these letters, because right there in the last paragraph talks about that the director of the photo lab, and that's John Holland and John Brinkman. And those people are very important because they put together the photo labs for NASA back at the very beginning of the very first Mercury flights in orbit. So that little piece of paper bears a lot of weight in proving that, by golly, I guess Ken really was there.
Exactly. Well, that's wonderful. And I am glad you were a pack rat, as you call it. That would be
okay. While I was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory and working with the head geologist, Dr. Thornton Page was in charge of the Lunar and Planetary Science Department just outside of the main campus of the Johnston Space Center there. He contacted me one afternoon and said, Ken, would you go to the photo lab and check out the 16 millimeter film from the command module of Apollo 14 and set up a showing for us? He said, for myself and several of the other geologists. So I did as he asked. I set up a projector, and one of the reasons he picked me is my military background. He knew that I knew how to operate what's called a gun sequence camera. And people out there who've maybe seen news reels, and they show an airplane, chasing another one, and they're firing their guns, and you're seeing all these tracers and things going on. It's a gun sequence camera that is filming that, and that allows the people to take a look at the pictures later and see if everything, if they needed to change anything. So I checked out that specific reel, went over to the building next to Mission Control in there and set up, and Dr. Page was there, and he had 6 other of the scientists with him. I set up the projector, and we were watching these pictures. They're about 15 minutes is about all the reel took. And on the backside of the moon, the moon was at about what you'd call
Hello?
So in this one of the craters we identified as Tsiolkovsky.
Ken, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. This is kind of things that go on with Camelot. I know you can do 20 other interviews and and have no problems whatsoever. You've told this story many times. I know you have. But could you just start back where you said the moon was at a certain kind of angle or whatever it was that you were about to say? Because we did briefly go off the air right then, strangely enough. So go ahead.
Right. Now, the moon was in what you'd call like a half moon phase, and on the back side of the moon, the same thing as on the front. Only half was illuminated by the sun. So as the Apollo 14 spacecraft was coming around and filming from the command module, the service module actually is where the 16 millimeter camera was, and we were approaching this crater. It's about 24 kilometers across. We labeled it as Tsiolkovsky. The Russians labeled most all of the medium-sized and larger craters on the backside of the moon because they got in orbit around the moon before we did with our cameras. At any rate, we're approaching this crater, and with half of it in shadow because of the sun angle, we get close enough, and in the dark shadowed part, there were like 5 domes. If you take your hand and turn your hand palm up and bring all your fingers together and look at the top of them, it looks like little domes all the way around, 5 of them, and they're somewhat opaque, being illuminated from the inside. And one of them had a steam column coming up from it. Dr. Page had me freeze the camera, and he had me zoom in, zoom out, back up, come one frame at a time or 4 frames at a time, which you can do with a gun sequence camera projector. That way you can analyze. And he had me stop, and he turned to the other guys and says, "Well, boys, what do you think of that?" And they all started laughing. It was a kind of an inside joke. Well, Dr. Page asked me to finish showing that reel and then check it back into the photo department. And I was trying to listen to what they were saying, but I was too busy trying to close things up. I went back to the photo lab and was checking it in. And the way it's set up at the photo lab, you have visitors can come to the outside and they can request specific pictures and things that if it's available to them, they can get a copy. If you go into the middle room, this is where a lot of the processing takes place, and then you have the storage in the far back, and you have to have a top secret clearance to get into there. Well, as I went into the middle room, there was a light table about 3 foot by 4 foot, and there were 3 people there. They were leaning over large negatives, and they were painting out stuff. And I asked them what they were doing. One of the guys says, "Well, we're professional strippers." The lady kind of took offense at that, I guess, and she said, "Well, actually, what we're doing is we're painting out the stars and things on the horizon that might be confusing to people." And that kind of set wrong with me. But I went ahead and checked in the film and was headed back over to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. And I ran into Dr. Page outside walking, and I asked, "So Dr. Page, oh, no, excuse me, let me back up here just a little bit." The next day, I was to take out that same roll of film and show it in the main auditorium at the Johnston Space Center to the rank and file scientists, engineers, and janitors, and everybody that wanted to watch it during a lunch break. And I'm showing the projector.
Can I stop you right there? Excuse me, but you said that you're going to take it over to show it in this other venue, right? The Johnston's, another auditorium. The next day, yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, but the question I have for you right here is, did you not think, or were you not told that this film was only going to be viewable by people with above top secret or secret clearances? In other words, do those people all have secret clearances, and were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that. In fact, I was extremely excited about the fact that the next day I was going to be showing the same film to everyone, and they're going to see that we discovered a base on the backside of the moon. I was very excited. In fact, my brother, Dr. A.R. Johnston, who helped design the vacuum chambers the big vacuum chambers and the lunar sample processing lab, he was with me in the control booth when I was showing the film to the rank and file. And when we came up on Tsiolkovsky, in the black area, the dark shadowed area, there was nothing there. So I actually stopped the camera, I stopped the projector, and told the people that I'm having technical difficulties, and took a few minutes. I took the film out, I checked, there was no cut, no splice that I could determine. So I put it back in and I finished showing it. And the people were all excited because they saw some great pictures of the backside of the moon and what the craters on the back. Ran into Dr. Page, and I asked him what happened to those domes and things we saw on the backside of the moon. His comment was, and the people who knew who Dr. Page was, he actually wore a across one eye and a patch. So he only had one eye, good eye, and he looked at me with that one good eye, and he winked, and he said there was never anything there. And even with one eye, you can tell when they're winking at you. But no, I had no knowledge that anything was going to be up. But within 24 hours, they had to have taken that film, made a copy, enlarged, did the paint out that they needed to paint out, put back, and duplicate the copy so that the one that I showed the next day did not have the base, as I call it, on the backside.
That is such an extraordinary story. And what I know that you have other sort of compatriots in NASA and outside of NASA. So first of all, let's go to the scientists that were in the room that saw the authentic, the ones which did show the base. Are you in touch with, or have you ever been in touch with any of those people individually at all?
None at all. And you have to remember how many years ago that was. I was fortunate to be one of the youngest consultant test pilots that they had at 26 years old. And I hate to say it, but the majority of them have checked out. That's why every time I get a chance, I tell people that were there, and I didn't even say those to the geologists that were there, come forward with the information now before you're gone and it's lost. And it's a little more difficult for us to prove that
right.
what you thought you heard isn't the truth, all of the truth.
So you were the only one, I assume, showing the film. Is that right? With that scientist who was directing you, and what was his name again?
Dr. Thornton Page.
Is he alive still or no?
Oh, no, he's passed away.
Okay. Did you ever try to contact him again?
No. The interesting thing, you have to understand, we were at such a high pace getting to the moon, one mission followed by another mission by another, and we would see anomalies or hear things that we wanted to check out. But unfortunately, we were being moved. And like I told you, you finish one contract for your company, which is about 2 or 3 years, and then you get either laid off and you have to go to another company and do another project. So you lose track of your contacts. And ultimately, interesting enough is that the high-tech people, the geologists too, but the engineers, the designers that built the Apollo program and built the spacecraft and designed the spacesuits and trained the astronauts, most of those people left and they went into private industry. And the Peter principle, you get promoted because people above you have moved out until you reach a point to where you're totally incompetent. And I'm going to get slammed for saying that, but I have met people there that are shocked. And when President Bush, the first Bush, said we're going to go back to the moon, they went out and the scientists that were left there, engineers, said, we don't know how to do it. They sent engineers to museums and places with being able to mic parts and make copies of it, because once we finished landing on the moon, and most of the other engineers will tell you, they had visitors that showed up at their door and confiscated their operations handbook, their drawings, and things like that. Those were taken away from us. And so consequently, when we were told we're I'm looking at another picture here of the lunar surface. I think the orientation is a little bit off. I think I'd turn it over the other way instead of the way it's looking. But when you're
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're in,
let me see if I can do that. I should be able to rotate the photo easy enough. I'm not sure which way you think. Is that the right way or no?
That's the right way. That looks good.
All right.
It's just the way our minds process things when we're looking at things. But when you're in 0G and you're upside down and going backwards, it does take a little bit of imagination to get your proper orientation.
Now, I think that I got this photo. Actually, I kind of grabbed it. It might be off of a moving, actually a film that I took off YouTube. I don't even know if this is not one of yours. I don't think. But do you recognize this at all?
One of mine that I'm familiar with. There's a lot of what you might be looking at that bright area there. Looks like a bit of smudging out that's been done. And that's the thing you have to look out for.
Right, but we definitely look like we've got something in this crater here. Would you agree?
Two bright spots, and also if you look at the 3 craters just above that one in the middle, in the flat area between all 3 of those, that shines up really, really bright. That would be something I'd want to look at. If I had the actual NASA photo number, I could probably go to my archive collection and look up.
Yeah, to be honest, I like I said, I just grabbed this. It looked interesting to my eyes, so I wanted to get your response.
See that? Yeah, you've enlarged it a little bit, and if you look at the bright, shiny area going at an angle up towards the top, and look slightly to the left, you can almost see a line area where it has been doctored out or smudged out.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, nonetheless. So So what I'm going to do is kind of flash your photos now. This is just one photo. I'm going to take that down, and I'm going to put a bunch of other photos on here as we go. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to get this other.
Now, I was never a real anomalous person looking for anomalies and things. In fact, that for the 40 and 45 years that I'd kept all these pictures in plastic sleeves to keep the oxygen off so they would be preserved.
So can you, but as we sort of show these on the screen, if you feel moved to sort of talk about them, it would be interesting to get your response on some of these. I guess I'm not even sure if I'm doing this really right, but I was hoping that this would work well. It's maybe not the best way to show things. What are we looking at in this small, it says the Lunar Sky Command Module and a question mark.
Well, if you're looking at the smaller picture below, that's the Command and Service Module. That's the one that fired the engines that put you in the translunar trajectory from the Earth and got you into lunar orbit. And you'd have the lunar module would have been docked to the front end of that. But this picture is being taken by the Apollo lunar module whenever it came back up to dock. Now, what I see in the picture above is not a picture at a distance of the command module reflecting light. In fact, that kind of makes me think of the statement that Dr. Aldrin, Buzz Aldrin, made very recently, where he talks about how he and Neil noticed that there was a bright light object that had been following them from the Earth to the moon, and they knew they didn't want to come out and say that we have a bogey or a UFO, unidentified flying object, tracking them. They made the decision when they called Mission Control to ask where the SRB stage was that put them, kicked them out of the Earth orbit. And they were told it was several thousands of miles and things away, and they knew right off. And Buzz has come out publicly and said that light tracked them and followed them all the way until they went into orbit around the moon. So
okay,
is a UFO.
Absolutely. Well, that doesn't surprise me. But what I want to know is, I heard you talking to George Knapp, and I heard you talking about Edgar Mitchell. And the interesting story about Edgar Mitchell is that he is out there publicly saying ET exists and so on and so forth. And yet, when you ask him about the moon, he denies seeing anything unusual on the moon or having any interaction with anything. And I heard your explanation. That was George Knapp said he was friends with Edgar Mitchell, and you said your response at the time was that you thought, well, they were so busy doing other things they didn't notice. Now, I'm sorry to be the sort of devil's advocate, as they say here, but that makes no sense to me, because the whole reason an astronaut wants to be an astronaut is to go to other planets, one assumes, and to discover what? Life on other planets. So if there was some indication of life, I don't care how busy they are, they're going to notice it. You know what I'm saying? So what, when you say that, is that just you trying to sort of explain away why there's a discrepancy between Edgar Mitchell's testimony on the one hand, that yeah, ET exists, on the other hand, that he saw nothing on the way to or from the moon or on the moon?
Okay. There's been a lot of research done on that, and I know that each crew members upon return went through debriefing, and the woman doctor, as I understand, and now I'll tell you, probably one of the best places to get the breakdown on that was a publication by Richard C. Hoagland, where he went into a lot of detail of during the debriefing.
Sure, the book Dark Mission. I read the book. I actually read the book, but go ahead.
Debriefing and actually deprogramming things that we witnessed and saw. There have been evidence that you ask them, well, what did it feel like? And their comment was, I don't remember what it felt like, but they can tell you what the mission was and what they did to accomplish the mission. But when you get into the details, it's very difficult. So you ask my own personal opinion on why Dr. Mitchell has a problem is part of that was part of the deprogramming, where you couldn't, if you saw an anomaly, or let's say, I didn't personally hear the tape, but I have talked to other at the time engineers that were at NASA at the time of Apollo 7. Spoken to the, we call it the private line. What they do is they tell everyone else to turn off their headsets, and he talks directly to the doctor, and he says, they're here, they've landed on the side of the crater, they're watching us. They saw that they couldn't remember after they went through that process. So what about Buzz Aldrin?
I mean, Buzz Aldrin seemed to have a better memory than some of the others. Is that right?
Well, he's come forward with information that some of the others have not. So I don't know if that's better memory or just maybe he has a little stronger ability to break down the programming.
Sure, and there's no doubt in I would say in our minds, in speaking of my audience in general, because I don't know, you may be not that familiar with Camelot, but because of my 10 years of investigation into this subject, and I've got a substantial audience, some of whom are listening live right now, and we basically know, and it's common knowledge, that the astronauts were programmed and continue to be programmed. In your case, do you feel that you were subjected to any kind of programming? You're certainly something of a renegade, having come forward and having a memory, a good solid memory, and you've got evidence and so on. But do you ever wonder to yourself, for example, that there might be any areas where you yourself might have seen even more, know even more, and aren't able to come forward with it because of programming? Has that ever occurred to you?
Not that I've possibly been programmed, and it's kind of like the Manchurian Candidate, if you want to look at it that way, that how they've been programmed. I think because I was far enough down in the level, even though I sat in on meetings of even I recall one member where we had Wernher von Braun was at, and with the astronauts, because I was representing the pilots from the lunar module standpoint, but we were not the ones that made the missions. We didn't go, so I guess they kind of figured that we weren't that important to deprogram. And but then again, as I said earlier, once we finished one phase of the program, we got laid off. And in those days, we didn't have 401ks and stuff like that. We had to live on what we'd saved and barely be able to make it by until you could get another job. And that's just the way things were done. But we were excited and proud of being part of the team that accomplished John Kennedy's goal, and that was to go to the moon in that decade, and we accomplished that. But as far as me personally, I don't think I've been programmed I just didn't have the opportunity to come forward because I was so busy getting into another field. I became a flight instructor for the Boeing company for 14 years and retired from Boeing in January 1st, 19. So I hadn't done anything about my pick collections. And we had a group. You might find this. We had a group of 6 of us at Boeing. That we jokingly called ourselves the Majestic 12. And in those days, we didn't have emails, we didn't have computers, all this. And we would hear something or get a copy of a report of something, UFOs or what have you, or ET, and we'd make copies and send them in the inter-office mail, and we'd get them. That's how we kept track of each other. So. And when we'd get a book that were really good stuff, we would pass it on to the others of us and let us know. And I was called by one of my friends, and he says, there's a Richard Hoagland, the guy that wrote that first book that we just read about, is in town, and he's going to be a conference. And I was off that night. I said, I'm going to go see him and get his autograph. And I checked in. I went to the conference room, went up to the desk, and I was getting ready to pay my deal. And I said, I've written a letter of introduction to Mr. Hoagland, because he said he was looking for people that might have pictures or information about the Apollo program. The woman looked at my letter. I said, her eyes got big and says, don't move, stay right where you're at. And I thought, I am in trouble now, that maybe I shouldn't have told him. And with just a couple of minutes, Mr. Hoagland came out from back, and I told him a little bit of what I had and what was going on and about my archive and what I had collected. He took me down front, set me in the front for the whole conference. And the next day he came with a group of 4 other people to my house, and I'd gotten my collection out of my safe. I had a big 3,000-pound safe to keep things. I just I'm a pack rat. I admit it, and I say things that I think are important for history. And I'd already given one complete set to Oklahoma City University, and I'm glad that I did. But anyway, so they were looking at that. In fact, my wife had never really paid any attention to the pictures I had, and we're all talking and looking at stuff, and they're saying, "Oh my God, would you look at this picture? Because so and so sent it to them, and it doesn't look at all like the real stuff." And my wife looked at the particular picture in the visor of the astronaut, it's Apollo 14, I think, Apollo 12, excuse me, where you, up in the top left corner of the astronaut's spacesuit visor, there's a reflection of an object suspended in the lunar atmosphere or lack of atmosphere. And so we had never really looked at looking for anomalies or what have you, but things kind of went wild after that. And in order to protect the archive and protect me, Richard Hogan set it up for me to attend press club in Washington, D.C., and come forward and tell the rest of the world and other nations that we did find things on the moon. And they felt that it would be safer for me to be that public about it so that I couldn't just accidentally have an automobile accident or fall off the edge of the earth because we're a flat.
Actually, well, Project Camelot, specializes in whistleblowers, and our motto is the best place to hide is out in the open. So that makes sense to us, certainly.
I did.
So you actually broke up when you said the year you left. Was it Northrop or Boeing? The last year, I guess you must have retired after that.
Well, no. Let's look at it. I left the NASA space program in December of 1980. I went to Denver. I went to work for Martin Marietta, and we were with part of the space shuttle program. And I was there during the approach and landing test, the very first landing test for the shuttle. And then I was transferred out to Vandenberg Air Force Base, where we were renovating what they call Slick 6. And that was a launch complex for very large type spacecraft. And we were redesigning the launch facility to be able to have the West Coast launch facility for the shuttle. And it was while we were there, and I was getting ready to make a trip to the Cape for one of the first launches. And that's when the Challenger blew up. And so they canceled that for me.
Well, do you have any theories on the Challenger, disaster?
Yeah, the theory I have on that is that part of it, as I said earlier, some of our best scientists and engineers and things had left. And then we had a group of people that were there that their job was to just promote and keep pushing. But one of the last tests I was involved with the ILC Corporation at NASA, which was the ones that designed the shuttle spacesuit systems, was to test a system whereby we could repair the tile in orbit around the Earth while we're in space. And they decided we've been so successful with the launches that we've done with the shuttle that we don't need to carry that extra 1,500 pounds of the manned maneuvering unit and all the repair stuff on mission. So they canceled all of that. And it happens is they get too much pride in being able to do what no other country was doing. And they just took a chance. And we knew that some tile, well, now there's two different things. The Challenger blew up on launch. And that was because the amount on launch, it broke loose and came down and damaged the side and caused a rupture of the hydrogen and the oxygen tanks. And you had a tremendous blow up, and we lost all of those. In fact, I knew all of the astronauts on that mission, with the exception of the school teacher that was on that flight. So it was tough. So
okay,
I wound up going to work with the other companies and wound up with Boeing, and then retired from Boeing later.
Okay, and you retired from Boeing what year?
I retired, well, first of all, I left NASA in 1980, went to work for Martin Marietta for a while, and then after they shut down, because of the Challenger, they shut down the West Coast launch facility, and then I went to work for the Boeing company up in Seattle as a 737 flight instructor for Boeing, and after 14 years at Boeing, I retired in 1998.
Okay. So was that actually you didn't actually do any other jobs since then, 98?
Not well, except for being one of their solar system ambassadors. And that
Oh,
was
right. Where JPL, I actually was a contractor for JPL for a while in the communications area. So I know JPL pretty darn well, I have to say. And anyway, so that's very interesting. Are you familiar with, actually, I have a million questions for you. So did you know Brian O'Leary, for example?
He was at NASA while I was, and then I think he left or was asked to leave. Okay.
Sorry, I think we lost you there. You were about to answer the question.
Right, I did. What I said was that I knew who Brian O'Leary was, and I'm sure I was in a meeting where he and some of the other astronauts were, but as far as knowing him personally, I did not know him personally.
Okay. What's interesting about Brian is he passed on, I think it was a little over maybe a year ago. But at any rate, he actually left the United States because he felt he was under threat because of some of his disclosures. And
Right.
He actually is a person who said that his records were being also disappeared by Caltech, where he had taught and had, a lot of, had worked at for years. And, this is a famous astronaut. If you can appreciate, he was part of the Mars, he was supposed to go to Mars. He never did, but was trained to do so. And so they have a sort of a record of actually turning against their own, so to speak, and then trying to disappear their records. In fact, a journalist in San Diego was fired for trying to do an article on Brian O'Leary while he was still alive. And this is how we got the story, because Brian and the journalist found out that they actually wanted to do away with all his records. It wasn't possible to do. Obviously, it's pretty hard to disappear a guy, especially when he's still alive,
Right.
in his records. And I guess you've come across something similar in your own sort of trajectory, right?
Lots of times. And Russia was pretty good at scrubbing out someone's existence. They would take photos and they would actually just paint them out where the person wasn't there. And one of the guys who was an expert of that, and that was Mr. James Oberg. He was an expert on the Russian program, and he and I used to sit together in his office and we'd talk about everything from man's progress of being terrified of finding out the existence of extraterrestrials all the way up to he liked to joke and say that we started off with the blob, and people were terrified by that, and ultimately if a saucer were to land on the White House lawn and a big hairy fuzzy thing came out, a little kid would say, "Hey, look, Mom, there's a Cookie Monster. He's my friend." So it's been a progress there. Now, in the United States, a number of people have expunged their records. And thank God I was a pack rat and I kept all the documents and the records and the NASA numbers on them and everything else. And every time they've come out attacking me, friends of mine and other people have come to my aid that had copies, or because now I published them out on the internet, they're there for everybody. They leave me alone pretty much now. And and I've been told that the main people that have been going after me have been told to back off and leave me alone because I'm getting more publicity when they attack me than if they left me alone.
So you saw structures on the moon, and we are familiar with what we call the grays. They're sort of prolific. They're everywhere, and we know that there are many different races of grays, as well as what we call programmable life forms that appear to be sort of semi-biological, I guess, and that those may have been even created by our military. So what's your point of view on the actual beings who may be on the moon and have built those bases?
Well, this is a different direction than where I've gone with most, but and talking with a few people with MUFON, other people who have studies with contact, Um, I've told the story just recently, and it'll be out in one of the books that we're get into. My first school called Hart, H-A-R-T, Texas, out in the country, where our closest neighbor was like a mile and a half away. We received a phone call. I was like 7 years old, from a neighbor that said that there'd been a tremendous rain, but there'd been a lightning struck probably right out from where our house was, about 50 yards. And I was the youngest of three boys in the family, so we put on our coats and we ran out. And I was going to try to beat my older brother. He was going to be sophisticated and take his time. The middle brother, Jimmy, I would outrun him because I didn't want to be last, being the smallest. When I got out about 50 yards out, there was a area which was smashed down. The maze in the early stages of maze, it was like probably October, had been smashed down into a circle about 25 feet across, I would guess now. And on the far side, there was what we call a whooping crane, a big bird. And it turned its head, it looked at me, turned its head back forward, and starts running across this crop circle, and flapped its wings a couple times, lifted off, and then disappeared. And I had asked my brothers if they had seen that, and they claimed they hadn't. And the people I've talked to, they want to get a professional in doing regression hypnosis and go back and look at that. But there've been, when you take that experience at 6.5, 7 years old, and the other events that have happened out through my whole life, the first book is my autobiography. So many things have happened in my life that, had it happened differently, I wouldn't have been there to save the pictures, to be at the right place at the right time. And I think that the book's going to be interesting when I go out and I tell it all and let it kind of, as you say, let it all hang out. I kind of have kept that part of my history totally quiet, because in America, they go after you and attack you and make everybody seem like they're crazy, stupid, or whatever. Whereas other countries now have come forward with their UFO records and what have you.
Absolutely.
So I'm
no doubt about it.
willing to talk about it now.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate your story. So you might have had some missing time, sounds like.
There were a lot of experiences happening after that, were constant dreams. One of the biggest ones was in the third grade, when the dream was that in this big field out behind our house, a craft landed, and it was a shimmering like a water curtain surrounding it, and that the neighbors, now this was once we moved into the town of, had all shown up to look at this thing, and they were all, oh my God, what's happening here? And then a door opens, and it's like shifts a waterfall, and the curtain opens, and there's a being taller, it waved at me to come in, and everybody else backed off and started leaving. I just walked over and walked inside. And the dreams would go on for years and years about where I went, how I was being trained to be an ambassador for between their peoples and our peoples. And there's so much going on there. And I kind of wonder.
Can you describe the being that would greeted you at the door? Can you describe that being? That particular being was more of a Norris, than a blonde, blue-eyed, medium build and medium height. And once I went up, I remember going up inside the stairs, and there were other beings there, kind of waving at me to come on in. There was another event that happened. We were taken on board a very large craft, and as kind of like a tour. They were taking the students because they were training us, and there were other entities of different shapes and different not configuration. They just looked different. There were the grays. There were some. They took us in one room where there were tanks where looked like infants who were being grown inside these tanks. One of the things we were doing is being taught how to be a go-between between humans on Earth and intelligent beings from other systems and other realities. I guess I'm not sure, but at any rate, I kind of go ahead. Oh, well, I mean, you know, in terms of these experiences, you're writing a book, I take it, another book that's going to have some of this in there?
Well, we've got two books out right now. The first one is my, and the second one that's out is mission reports. Now, while I was active there at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory and on through there, every time we had to have a mission, within a week or two after getting back, we would release the mission reports, which gave in detail what the objectives were, how we were going to do them, and what we did to accomplish that, and pictures and things that went on. So those that I have are undoctored. If you can even find newer ones, they've been changed. That's book number 2. Book number 3 is we're releasing my whole collection, my whole archive of all the pictures that I've kept secret for all these years, because they. And I said, for other people that have information like, you need to come forward and get it out there before you're gone, and then it's lost to history and society. So that's book number 3. The other book that's in is My Metaphysical Journey, which kind of gets into what we were just talking. Book number 4. So right now we've got 2 already out on. If you go to kenjohnstonmedia.com, you can find out about where the first 2 books are. And I'm going to be adding a lot more to that autobiography. So anyone who has already bought the book will be getting a free upgrade update.
Great.
Those are ebooks right now.
You talked about Oberg briefly, and you said he was a sort of a debunker. Is that right?
Well, he was. We were good friends. Excuse me. And he's gone after me numerous times. And a year and a half ago, when the Mars Society had their convention at the Johnson Space Center, James and I got together, and he was showing me a 16 millimeter picture from a handheld 16 millimeter camera from the command module window, supposedly of the backside of the moon. And Tommy said that was the only pictures they took, etc. And then once he finally figured out, I think, that we were friends back then, and it's kind of strange that now he hasn't been bothering me since then. And James, I appreciate that, but I've got the documents and the records. Don't mess with me.
Oh yeah,
there's a
absolutely.
Great one. Okay, that one is upside down. If you can rotate it. Oh, it's interesting that they got the number right side up, but then the pictures are upside down.
Now, with this is a module. Is that right?
This is the command and service module. The call it looks like a can of vegetables attached to the back end of the command module, which has the heat shield that lets you re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So the service module and shows the payload bay door open on the side. That's where all the cameras and different things like that are mounted with. While the 2 guys are down on the lunar surface, the one like on Apollo 11, Mike Collins stayed in the command module, keeping house and taking pictures and doing experiments as it's going around the Earth.
Okay, but how did we get a picture like this from the outside of this module? Is that the Earth in the background or not?
No, that is the moon. And if you look at the top picture and you look over on the far side, right where that little line goes up there, they missed that. We were always interested in looking at the spacecraft and how we got there. We didn't look down at the moon, but if you look at it, you can see all of those domes all in perfect alignment, and they've enlarged it in the bottom picture. And that was Brett Shepard is the one that discovered this on one of my pictures, and I was flabbergasted when I got a chance to look at it, because now this is not quite the same, but the domes look very much like the ones that I had seen. There you go, enlarged it, great. In the original picture, you can see it on the lunar surface, and that's where, with his training as an artist and being able to.
Hello?
Domes, either habitats, all in line, both top to bottom, left to right, and then larger ones off the side, which are very similar to large antenna array. So this, I was flabbergasted when he showed me this picture just within the past 4 or 5 months, I think, that we've been together.
Okay, but I still want to understand, do we have 2 craft? I mean, why are we even able to see, you're seeing this, the module, was this superimposed over this image, or what craft are we viewing this picture from?
That is the Apollo 15 command and service module as being photographed from the lunar module. on their way coming back up to rendezvous and dock. Okay, so
I see.
is that
so it looks like though you're saying they're coming to be docked, it doesn't actually look like it's underneath a vehicle. It's actually shot from the side. So how does that work?
Well, when you and you'll do a complete rotation, roll, pitch, and yaw, and a complete rotation around, so you can see if you have any damage done to your spacecraft before you line up. And you'll notice at the very in your picture, you're looking at the command module upside down with the nose of the cone coming out to the docking probe. That's that little dark pointed things at the tip down at the bottom. That's the docking probe. The lunar module has like a funnel that would dock into. So yes, we didn't have Photoshop. We didn't have anything like that. About the best we could do would be to paint things out. And if you order that picture number, that AS1588-11967 from NASA, you look, you can see where they have painted and smudged out that base that's on the lunar surface.
Right. What we see over here.
Right.
Okay. Well,
my pictures have the original because mine were made from the original negatives. That's why they've been so anxious to protect my my archive.
Well, I'm sure of that. I would say that if someone wasn't examining every photo, including the ones that you have, that even that indicates a programming, because you're told not to look for something as opposed to, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of an interesting thing. Now, in terms of what's going on and with the moon and China going to the moon and saying there was no evidence of, I don't know if you heard that story where they said there was no evidence that the America had landed on the moon. Did you hear that?
Oh, I've heard that so many times, and I love it because these people espousing such things weren't even born when we did this. And all you have to do is take the Hubble telescope. And right now, they even make it available to people on Earth to be able to actually align it. And it takes and focuses in on, and you get pictures of it from Hubble on the lunar surface. And they will zoom in with the Hubble telescope. You can see the descent stage still setting on the moon. You can see the tracks where the rover drove around on the moon. And,
right.
People have just been smoking something a little bit too strong.
Okay, but did you hear that actually the Chinese had said something about that they recently sent a craft up there. I don't think it landed, although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it did land. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. But what do you think? Because China, that was a rumor that came out of China. Did you think that was then disinfo that they were trying to put out there?
Okay, well, part of your question was all blocked off on it and didn't come through, but I'll address the Chinese one.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that we have such a bad connection when you've done so many interviews. It's really fascinating that they're really afraid you're going to say something here to me because I'm going to ask you some good questions that most people won't have the guts to ask you. But go ahead. So what do you think? You think China was lying? China, the China News Service or whoever came out with that, was China putting out disinfo when they said they didn't come across any American debris? Or was that just disinfo in your opinion?
Well, they did not land near one of our enough to walk to or drive their little lunicod over to one of our landing sites. So there's still so much political guarding the major powers of the world, and each one wants to one up the other, and so they'll leak information saying, "Oh, this one didn't do that," or "They did this." And right now, I can say I've seen reports showing that some of the, particularly some of the Chinese landing, has been hoaxed, and another one is that they drove their lunicod over to a specific area where they're looked like part one time a habitat because they were reflecting high quality metal and glass, and they claim they never went there. Although another picture actually shows the tracks that they went there when they had shut down, sending signals and pictures back to the Earth. So take it with a grain of salt from what you hear from the Chinese mission.
Okay, well,
Same as with,
I saw a presentation on the internet, Richard Hoagland talking about China and their space sort of excursions at the moment, and I am interested to that people are taking them so on face value and not questioning what they're really doing and whether they've really accomplished what they say. Now, I have whistleblowers, as you may know, and one of my whistleblowers told us a long time ago. And he worked for a variety of places, including, gosh, what's the name of it? Anyway, a lot of top secret places. And he said that we did go to the moon, but we had quote unquote help. And that in essence, that the so-called, rocket technology was not what got us there. Do you have anything to say about that or any thoughts on that?
okay, as I said, your half of your conversation was blocked. I didn't hear it, and I'm not sure what the question is.
One of my whistleblowers, I'll say it again and hope you can hear it. One of my whistleblowers said we went to the moon, but we had help, and basically saying that our rocket technology, didn't get us there. That they were using, we were using ET technology. We've got crashed UFOs around the planet. This has been going on since actually the 1940s and even earlier if you want to track the Nazis. So it's very likely that our space program got their hands on some technology. Do you think that's likely?
I think it's more likely the fact that Werner von Braun, once we brought him on, the paperclip guys onto the space program, their knowledge of rocketry and designs are what got us there. Since then, and I think one of the hidden ideas was who could get there first and land in the right places might discover technology that could spring us further ahead than the others. And same thing's going on Mars right now. I mean, Mars is just wide open.
Well, you're supposed to go to Mars as a commercial space venture, is that right?
Well, very interesting you asked that question. The Mars One Corporation out of the Netherlands in 2012, I believe it that far back, started looking for people willing to go to Mars one way to colonize. And my wife has to take the train to go 100 miles north from where I live up to Santa Fe. And she was listening to a newscast where they were looking for people that had past experience like I did. And she called me on the cell phone and says, if you really want to go to Mars, you better get your application in. And I did that. So for over 2.5 years, I was the only one that started off at 70 years old. They said they wanted people from the ages of 18 to 80. So here I am at 70. I said, why not? And so I applied, and they started off 202,586 people who go one way to Mars. They got that down to 11,000, down to 1,050. To 1,056, and then down to they were going to get it down to the final 100. And each time they sent me to Switzerland to give a talk over there, in Poland, all over the United States. They were getting a lot of mileage out of my past experience, being the oldest person that could bridge the gap between the older generation and the younger ones to go to Mars. And so when they announced the final 100, a friend of mine and I, we went through the list, and there wasn't a single one of them that was over 60. So in other words, I got tagged again for being too old for the space program. And again, I think they made a mistake. But
and you were willing to leave. You were actually willing to leave the Earth and not come back, though, isn't that right?
Absolutely. And my wife said that she's glad that I'm not going, because she said, but she.
Hello?
It's always been my goal, even from back when I was a little kid, and those dreams is I'll tell later some of the things that I dreamt that I did while I was on Mars. So,
well, actually, let's stop right there. And what did you dream when you went? What you did when you went to Mars? Well, I'd love to hear it.
Me and my big mouth, right?
it was eventually renamed JSC in Houston, Texas, as a civilian astronaut consultant pilot. He worked as a contractor from 1966 to 72,